This presentation has been translated for intergalactic use in the education sector. Hello fellow students, my name is and I attend in the Helios sector 8-7.5 Apple 9-7. This is my presentation on the Bering Land Bridge Natural Preserve located on the primitive planet Earth. So let's begin with the history of this area. So although located on a primitive planet, the Bering Land Bridge has a rich history, dating back 10,000 years before current Earth time, when it was used by migrating humans from the East Asia continent to cross into North America. It was then used by Alaskan natives for hunting and gathering purposes, and then the next notable historical event was in 1898 during the Nome Gold Rush, where prospectors came to the area and built Fairhaven Ditch, which is a feature still located in the park today. So why was this area designated as having importance to humans? The Stewart Peninsula and the Bering Land Bridge Preserve is the remnant of the Bering Land Bridge, which was the way humans crossed from Asia into North America, and it has a lot of cultural significance for humanity and its origins. So there's interest left in the artifacts that were left behind by these early people, as humans have yet to invent time travel like the rest of us, and just ask them. So, what was the process for making this park? Well, it begins with the Alaskan Natives Claims Settlement Act of 1971, which was created due to land ownership disputes between the state of Alaska and native groups due to a conflict in the Alaska Statehood Act. It affected 145.5 million acres, but it didn't resolve the issue. It just set up a path to get to a way to designate areas. And Congress stalled big time on designating these areas, so much so that their current leader at the time, Jimmy Carter, got so fed up with this and used the Antiquities Act in 1978 to designate the area a national monument to protect it from drilling and mining that was going to occur if they let it expire. Congress eventually got their act together and created the Alaskan National Interest Lands Conservation Act in 1980, which declared the area a national preserve with a scientific and conservation focus, and that kind of resolved the issue permanently. The ICUN designates the Bering Land Bridge National Preserve a Category 5 protected area. So, what humans exactly were involved in this decision-making process? We've already talked about Jimmy Carter on the top left, who was their president and leader at the time. In the black and white is Rogers Morton, who was the Secretary of the Interior during the 1980 Act. And there were also some stakeholder influential groups that were involved, such as environmentalists, land developers, and miners, as well as the Alaskan Federation of Natives that all lobbied and did their part to get these acts passed in the way they wanted. So, were humans able to come to an agreement? Was everybody happy with this? The answer is obviously no. Humans never agree. There are many different viewpoints among Alaskans and policymakers regarding the role of federal land. Some thought it should be developed, others thought it should be kept as wilderness areas, and then there were also mining interests that contested the federal designations. But it didn't go so far as to require evictions of mass groups of people, as humans have a tendency to do when they kick people out of places they want to be in. Alaska was almost made entirely a federally owned land prior to these acts, so the acts actually increased native and private lands ownership in Alaska. It just kind of designated it in a way that it could be used. So, what are some direct threats to this protected area? Because of how isolated the area is, a lot of the threats have to do with natural processes, but there are some threatened and endangered bird species in the area, and there's also increased marine activity in the peninsula that can have some issues, but the biggest issue is, drumroll please, sea ice. Yay. So in the area, the sea ice has decreased in thickness, quantity, and age, just basically becoming weaker sea ice. And this is bad for a lot of reasons. Partly, the healthy sea ice is necessary to maintain the environmental conditions, so things like habitat are affected, as well as the animals and plants living in the area. And then additionally, Having thinner ice makes conditions for subsistence hunting more dangerous, which is how a lot of native people get their food. So that's not good as well for the people living in the area. And thirdly, the Arctic ice pack that used to protect the area from marine traffic does not come as far south. And this exposes the park to more marine incidents, like oil spills and coastal erosion, as the ice that used to hold the coastline in place during storms is not predictable and is no longer there to the extent it used to be. So what are some indirect threats caused by this, or, added to? Firstly is erosion. We've already talked about it. It erodes the coastlines, as you can see in this picture, and that has led to a loss of habitat for animals and plants, as well as exposing artifacts to the elements. And this is a harsh climate, so when these artifacts are exposed, you get a loss of culture and history, which is really negative to the area. And the underlying cause of this threat is mostly climate change. Climate change affects temperature and sea levels and makes it harder for ice. We know that the polar ice caps are melting, things like that. And climate change is largely due to human activities like fossil fuels, deforestation, and agriculture. So, are there any historical influences on this threat? Definitely. Human practices have been seen to cause climate change. They never seem to have their act together, do they? This society that humans have created on their planet, this materialistic consumer society, praises damaging activities that help contribute to things like climate change. Additionally, on a side note a little bit, the area is very remote, so historically very remote and currently very remote. So that means that there's not a lot of Western knowledge about the previous conditions of the sea ice. So in essence, this lack of history makes the baseline a little unclear, so it's harder to tell when things aren't going well. So how do they manage this? Mostly because of the isolation. It's through monitoring and evaluation protocols to establish a baseline. That's the main focus. And they're doing that with the National Park Service Arctic Network Inventory and Monitoring Program, where they're creating a GIS-based vulnerability assessment of coastal conditions. And they're doing that using analytical models and combining it with GIS data to determine and predict which areas are most vulnerable to erosion. So basically making a list like a ranking system. And this is made difficult by how remote the area is, so there's not a lot of established information, so they have to get it all themselves. And as to whether it's been successful, this is still an ongoing project, but they did complete the initial listing, so now what they're doing is figuring out ways to manage it and figuring out where to direct their resources. So I would say it's successful. So we're going to talk about 3 management strategies that are seen in the park in this case study. Firstly, and most primarily, is the shifting baseline syndrome. This is a major component of this study because of how isolated the area is. Humans do not have an accurate representation of the area or accurate knowledge and understanding of the environment and how it should look. There just aren't many visitors and there's not a strong management presence in the area. So this leads to a lack of knowledge and a lack of data. That means that when things go wrong, like when a coastline erodes, it's hard to tell what it's supposed to look like and when it's not looking like that. Secondly, dealing with threats may require long-term activity. Climate change will definitely require long-term activity. It's not going to go away. It's a continuous process. And so there needs to be regular monitoring and evaluation of conditions, like continuously, so that administrators know how things are going and what needs to be done. So they'll need to continuously address it. And so, yeah. Thirdly and lastly, threats to PAs are inevitable. So this is an area highly dependent on natural processes, and it's inevitably going to be impacted by climate change, especially with how important sea ice is. So we know that climate change is not going to get better. We can reduce how quickly it's progressing, but we can't reverse climate change. Humans can't reverse climate change. So they need to recognize that new threats are likely to arise as the situation progresses, and administrators will need to plan for these threats accordingly. Um, so, yep, that was the end of the presentation. If you liked it, my name was blah, 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 and if you didn't, my name was Anna Cly, located on Earth.